In March 1992, an unconscious man was found behind a location in Hyattsville, Maryland. Arrests in this case would only happen decades later. Ricardo Burbano was born in 1973. He grew up to become a resident of Falls Church, Virginia. At the age of 19, he stood at the beginning of independence. On March 31, 1992, officers with the Prince George's County Police Department made a grim discovery in Hyattsville, Maryland. At the back of a location, they found an unconscious adult male. It was immediately clear that the man showed no signs of life, and the scene quickly shifted from one of uncertainty to tragedy. The victim was identified as Ricardo Burbano. His body stayed at the location until plans were made to transport him to the office of the chief medical examiner in Baltimore, Maryland. An autopsy was done following the transfer of his remains. The examination revealed disturbing details about the violence he went through. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation, combined with multiple stab and cut wounds, as well as blunt force trauma. These findings painted a chilling picture of the brutality he suffered. This ruling confirmed what the investigators already suspected. Ricardo's life had been taken in a violent and deliberate act. Further investigation traced the location of the crime back to the day before on March 30th. The authorities determined that the crime happened inside a residence on the 100 block of Q Street Northwest. This discovery shifted the focus of the investigation away from Hyattsville and into Washington, D.C. Despite the early steps taken by investigators, the case soon faced a frustrating reality. Leads were scarce and information was limited. With little progress being made, the investigation grew cold. In 2022, 3 decades later, a significant development brought new life to the long-stalled investigation. Members of the Metropolitan Police Department's Cold Case Unit identified a suspect. With this breakthrough, an arrest warrant was secured for a 47-year-old man from Wimauma, Florida, formally charging him with first-degree murder. On October 20, 2022, that suspect was sent back to Washington, D.C. to face the charges. The detectives continued to press forward with their work, and the investigation soon identified another individual believed to be involved. That person was 54-year-old Tyrone Long of Northwest Washington. Evidence gathered by the investigators pointed to his role, leading to further legal action. On April 1, 2025, a D.C. Superior Court grand jury indictment was obtained against Long. Members of the United States Marshals tracked him down and placed him under arrest. After his capture, Long was transported to the Metropolitan Police Department's branch. There, he was formally charged with first-degree murder. The officials have emphasized that the cold case remains under investigation. They announced that a reward of up to $25,000 is being offered for information, leading to the arrest and conviction of all individuals connected. The decades-long search for justice serves as a reminder of how time may pass, but the pursuit of truth never fades. In September 1993, a chilling discovery was made in Warrenton, Indiana. A body was found lifeless at the bottom of his basement stairs. The violent crime was left unanswered for more than 3 decades. Norman Ellerbrook was born on January 23, 1930. As a young man, Norman graduated from Central High School. Soon after, he answered the call to serve his country, becoming a veteran of the Korean War. After his service, Norman transitioned back into civilian life. One of his roles was as a chef at the Executive Inn. In addition to his work as a chef, Norman also found employment with the post office. At 63 years old, Norman was living a full and active life. Despite this, Norman had no way of knowing the danger that waited ahead. On September 2, 1993, his life came to a tragic end. That day, it was his roommate who made the grim discovery inside their Warrenton, Indiana home. After realizing how serious what had been found was, Norman's roommate wasted no time in contacting the police. The call was urgent, and within a short while the officers arrived at the home. The sight that met them was disturbing. Norman was discovered lying at the bottom of the basement stairs. The authorities quickly secured the scene, recognizing immediately that what had happened was not a simple accident. The investigation began at once with the detectives searching for answers as to how and why Norman had met such a fate. Every detail was important, and the basement became a critical location for gathering evidence. To determine the true cause of death, an autopsy was carried out. The medical examination revealed that Norman had suffered a blunt force trauma to the head, a significant injury that pointed to deliberate violence. In addition, he had multiple stab wounds, injuries that made it clear that his death had been the result of a brutal attack. The brutality of the wounds suggested that whoever had attacked him had done so with deadly intent. Despite the immediate efforts of law enforcement, the case remained unsolved and went cold. In 2025, more than 3 decades after Norman's case was opened, the Indiana State Police Cold Case Squad joined forces with the FBI to look at the case again. Time had passed, but new tools and methods in crime science gave the investigators the ability to look at the evidence with fresh eyes. The decision to reprocess the material was driven by advances in DNA testing that had not been available at the time of the original investigation. Using modern techniques, the forensic experts carefully tested the evidence that had been saved from the crime scene. This renewed effort produced a DNA profile, a breakthrough that represented the first significant development in the case in years. The profile was then entered into national DNA databases. The results were striking. The database comparison revealed a match to Timothy Farber, a 61-year-old man. This match directly connected him to the evidence recovered from the basement where Norman's body had been discovered. Farber's DNA was found on Norman's fingernails, a knife in the sink, and on a rag in the family room of the home. Based on the DNA findings and supporting investigative work, the Gibson County prosecutor took formal action. On July 22, an arrest warrant was issued. That same day, Indiana State Police and the FBI worked together with Evansville Police to find the suspect. At about 4:10 in the afternoon, the officers found Farber walking in the area of Fulton Avenue and Maryland Street. He was taken into custody without incident and transported to the Gibson County Jail. There, he was booked on the charge and is currently being held without bond as the legal process moves forward. In 1995, Farber admitted to ending the life of 44-year-old Brian Russell in the victim's Evansville apartment during a robbery. He spent at least 20 years in prison for that crime. After the arrest, the police authorities spoke publicly about the outcome of the renewed investigation. After years of uncertainty and frustration, the case had finally reached a point of resolution. In their comments, the officials said that while nothing could undo the violence Norman had gone through, accountability had finally been secured. The Tennessee prosecutors are dealing with a troubling case of a refugee from Central Africa whose history was marked by trauma and escalating violence. Leopold originates from Central Africa. In 1998, he arrived in the United States under refugee status. His move was not one of choice, but of necessity, shaped by the chaos of his early years. Despite his new beginning in America, Leopold's past weighed heavily on him. He openly talked about the trauma he went through as a child, particularly the harsh punishments he received from his father. He described being tied up and physically disciplined, memories that carved deep scars and would later influence the path he chose in life. Instead of breaking free from the cycle of pain he knew in childhood, he found himself repeating destructive patterns in adulthood. Ultimately, Leopold turned toward crime. In 2015, he found himself once again before the court system, this time facing charges under Tennessee's habitual motor vehicle offender laws. After a bench trial, he was found guilty on 2 separate counts. The judgment resulted in back-to-back 3-year probation terms, placing him under long supervision with the expectation that he would follow the conditions set by the court. Despite the leniency of probation in place of jail time, he did not follow the requirements. His first violation happened after he was arrested for aggravated assault and failed to make required payments. This breach showed his unwillingness or inability to meet the court's obligations, setting the stage for further issues. The violations did not end there. After additional assaults, his behavior again brought him into conflict with the justice system. With repeated infractions piling up, the court had little choice but to respond more firmly. His continued disregard for legal restrictions left a record of escalating defiance. Ultimately, the court revoked his probation. This time, his punishment was a 1-year jail sentence at 100%, leaving no room for early release. In addition, he was ordered to serve 6 years of intensive supervised probation after his release. These measures reflected how seriously the court viewed his continued violations. In 2018, Leopold sought relief from his earlier convictions by filing a post-conviction appeal. He argued that he had received ineffective help from his lawyer during the proceedings related to his habitual motor vehicle offender charges. The appellate court, however, reviewed his petition and affirmed the denial, leaving the convictions and penalties unchanged. Alongside these legal battles, in 2015, Leopold committed a more disturbing offense. Though he was a stranger to her, he picked up a 12-year-old girl and assaulted her. The child reported the crime immediately, and the police began searching for the suspect. Despite her account, the authorities were unable to identify him at the time, and the case went cold. It was only 5 years later, when his DNA was finally matched through the national CODIS database, that he was identified and connected not only to this assault, but to other crimes as well. Leopold's legal troubles reached a peak with a guilty verdict on July 15, 2025. The sentencing proceeding would carry enormous weight, as the offense requires a mandatory Range 2 sentence. Under Tennessee law, that range dictates a punishment of no less than 25 years and up to 40 years in prison, all to be served at 100%. Such a sentence leaves no room for parole or early release, ensuring that every year must be served in full. Over the years, Leopold was given opportunities through probation to correct his course, but those chances were repeatedly wasted. Now he would finally face justice. In December 2019, a 19-year-old man left his grandmother's house in Indianapolis and never returned. What began as a missing person case soon revealed signs of a calculated trap. Rodney Mitchell was born in the year 2000. At the age of 19, he was a college freshman. He attended Manchester University on a scholarship. As a first-year student, he had not yet chosen a specific career path, but one possibility he considered was returning to coach at his former high school, a place that had given him both memories and inspiration. Academically, Rodney had shown his abilities from a young age. At just 12 years old, he competed in a state spelling bee championship, an accomplishment that highlighted his discipline and intelligence. Outside the classroom, Rodney was an active young man. He played both basketball and baseball for his high school teams, showing off his athletic abilities and teamwork. Beyond sports, he was also involved with various church groups where he connected with his community and strengthened his values. In December 2019, Rodney returned home to Indianapolis after completing his first semester at Manchester University. On the evening of December 7th, he left his grandmother's house, heading out into the night. His departure seemed routine, but it would mark the last time his family saw him alive. When Rodney did not return home that evening, his family immediately grew concerned. Hours stretched into the night, and as time passed without any word from him, their worry deepened. The next steps became urgent, and his loved ones went to the authorities to file a missing person report. What had started as concern quickly grew into fear. The police began their work by trying to trace Rodney's last movements. The investigators searched for any clue that could lead them to his whereabouts. The family hoped for answers, holding on to the possibility that he would be found safe. Each moment of uncertainty weighed heavily as the search continued. 2 days later, a grim discovery shattered those hopes. Someone spotted a body along the banks of the White River. The sight was disturbing enough to prompt an immediate call to the authorities. Within minutes, the police arrived at the scene to secure the area and begin the process of identification. As the officers examined the scene, the tragic reality set in. The body was quickly identified as Rodney Mitchell. The young man whose future had held so much promise was gone. For the officers present, it became clear that this was no longer a missing person case. It was the investigation of a crime. Medics soon arrived at the scene to provide confirmation. After their assessment, they pronounced Rodney dead where he was found. As the investigation moved forward, detectives from the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department responded to the scene. Their early observations raised troubling questions. One detail that stood out immediately was that Rodney's pockets had been turned inside out, a sign that he may have been robbed before his death. This small but significant detail hinted at the possibility of a violent encounter. In addition to this discovery, the detectives also found evidence near Rodney's body. 2 live rounds and 1 fired casing were lying close by, further suggesting that a gun had been used during the incident. The presence of both unfired and fired ammunition made it clear that violence had played a role in his final moments. The police reports confirmed that Rodney had been reported missing on December 7th. The missing persons report noted that he was last seen driving his dark blue 2001 Honda Accord on the night he left his grandmother's house. This detail gave the investigators another crucial piece of the puzzle. Rodney had been with his vehicle when he was last seen alive. On December 10th, the detectives returned to the crime scene and made another important discovery. They found Rodney's car parked in the area. What raised suspicion was the fact that the vehicle had not been there when the officers first found his body 2 days earlier. Its sudden appearance raised questions about who had moved it and why it had been placed back near the crime scene. As the detectives pieced together the timeline, they worked tirelessly to understand what had really happened to Rodney. Each lead was pursued, and every detail was examined in hopes of bringing clarity to the case. The evidence pointed to foul play, but the full circumstances of his death remained hard to figure out. Despite their efforts, the investigators struggled to find witnesses who could shed light on the events of that night. Without anyone coming forward, and with limited physical evidence, the case remained at a standstill. 4.5 years later, in July 2024, Rodney's case was transferred to the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's Unsolved Cases Unit. With renewed focus and a fresh look at the evidence, the detectives began uncovering critical details that had previously gone unnoticed. Their efforts soon led to the identification of two suspects, 28-year-old Alexander Russell and 25-year-old Jonathan Hayes. This marked a turning point in the long-stalled investigation. Through interviews and evidence review, the investigators learned that the suspects had used trickery to lure Rodney to the riverbank. They had reportedly pretended online to be his girlfriend, a woman who had dated him in the past. According to her statement, Russell had previously threatened her life at the very same location. She believed that he had used her social media identity to trick Rodney into meeting there. After his death, the girlfriend remembered a chilling moment. Russell reportedly told her, "Tell them you do not know nothing about it." This statement deepened suspicions and tied him more closely to the crime. As the detectives pressed further, more accounts began to surface, strengthening the case against both men. A former roommate of Russell provided critical testimony, telling the investigators that Russell had confessed to the shooting. Meanwhile, Hayes admitted during interviews that he had helped get rid of Rodney's car and was present during the shooting itself. He said that he heard 3 gunshots, and surveillance footage later reviewed by the detectives supported the timeline he described. The investigation also received a scientific boost. In April 2025, DNA testing was done on Rodney's vehicle. The results confirmed the presence of DNA from Rodney, Russell, and Hayes inside the car. This forensic evidence solidified the link between the suspects in the crime, leaving little room for doubt about their involvement. On July 11, 2025, the Marion County Superior Court issued arrest warrants for both Russell and Hayes. At the time, both were already serving sentences on unrelated charges. Alexander Russell of Indianapolis was charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of robbery resulting in serious bodily injury. He is currently serving a 25-year sentence for the attempted murder of a 16-year-old. Jonathan Hayes, also of Indianapolis, was charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of robbery resulting in serious bodily injury. He is serving a 4-year sentence for armed robbery. After the arrests, IMPD's deputy chief praised the persistence of the Unsolved Cases Unit, stating that their determination led to the breakthrough. He emphasized that the arrests reflected the department's continued commitment to justice, no matter how much time had passed. In October 2013 in Clarksville, Indiana, what began as a house fire call quickly revealed something far more disturbing. DNA evidence was collected, but the case soon went cold, leaving families without answers for more than a decade. On October 9, 2013, emergency responders were called to the scene of a house fire at 436 North Randolph Avenue. The call initially appeared to involve a residential fire, but what officers discovered inside quickly shifted the focus from fire to a crime investigation. The house hid a far darker reality than what was first reported. Behind the smoke and flames lay a crime scene that would trouble the investigators for years to come. When the officers entered the home, they found the bodies of 2 men who had suffered fatal stab wounds. The victims were identified as Miguel Rodriguez Solis and Julio Cesar Ventura Monzon. Their deaths were brutal and deliberate, immediately pointing to violence as the cause rather than the fire itself. Within the residence, the investigators worked carefully to gather physical evidence. Among the items collected was DNA material, which they hoped would provide answers about who had been present at the time of the crime. As the detectives pieced together the scene, they also noted the absence of another man who lived at the address. A 3rd resident was missing, raising immediate questions about his whereabouts and possible involvement. This missing individual became a focus of interest as the investigators attempted to determine whether he was a victim who had run away or a suspect connected to the crime. The detectives interviewed witnesses, examined forensic evidence, and searched for connections that could reveal the events leading up to the crime. Despite their efforts, the case proved challenging with no immediate breakthrough to point clearly toward a suspect. For years, the case remained unsolved, staying as a cold case in the files of law enforcement. The case remained unsolved for nearly 12 years, with no clear answers and no suspect identified until July 2025, when a significant breakthrough shifted the direction of the case. After more than a decade, authorities finally discovered information that would connect the past crime to a present suspect. The officials located Carlos Alberto Bonilla Kennis at a federal immigration detention facility in Georgia. He was being held at an ICE facility, and during the course of routine processing, his identity was flagged. Carlos is a Salvadoran national whose roots trace back to El Salvador. He eventually lived in the United States and settled in Clarksville, Indiana. When the Clarksville detectives were alerted about Carlos's detention, they immediately looked again at the evidence collected in 2013. Among the most significant pieces of evidence was the DNA obtained from the crime scene. Forensic comparison revealed that the DNA collected from inside the house matched that of Carlos. The match established a direct link between him and the scene where Miguel and Julio were murdered. This connection carried even more weight because Carlos was the man that had been missing since the night of the crime. His disappearance in 2013 had raised suspicions, but without solid evidence, the authorities were unable to take action at the time. After the confirmation, Carlos was placed under custody based on an outstanding warrant. The legal process began to prepare for his return to Indiana, where he faced charges. He will appear in court for a February 24, 2026 jury trial on charges of murder and arson. After 12 years of uncertainty, the case is no longer dormant, and the suspect is set to face the consequences of the crimes committed in 2013.